The security monitor glowed in the darkened study when Everett Caldwell leaned forward, coffee forgotten, heart tightening. On the screen, the living room lay quiet, polished floors catching the last breath of sunset. Maribel's wheelchair faced the window. Nyla Brooks knelt before it, her posture calm, her hands hovering near Maribel's knees. Everett zoomed the feed. He had installed cameras everywhere after the accident, telling himself it was protection, not fear. Doctors came and went. Specialists promised possibilities, then took them back. Only the camera stayed honest. Nyla bowed her head. Her lips moved, soundless to him. She guided Maribel's hands together, slow and deliberate, like teaching a language that didn't use words. Everett felt heat crawl up his neck. Touching Maribel's legs was forbidden. Everyone knew that. Then Nyla hummed. The tune stirred something old, something southern and aching. Everett's chest tightened as Maribel's fingers twitched. He leaned closer, breath shallow, eyes burning. The impossible happened. Maribel's right foot shifted, barely, a whisper of movement against the footrest. Everett stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. His pulse roared. He rewound the footage. Again. There it was. Movement. Everett staggered back, hand to his mouth. In that silent room, surrounded by screens and wealth and control, a single truth cracked through him. Whatever Nyla Brooks was doing, it wasn't on the rules list. And it might change everything. He reached for the keyboard, then stopped, afraid of what another rewind might confirm, afraid of hope returning uninvited, dangerous, and alive, inside a house he had kept sterile with money, silence, and watchful lenses that had never once prepared him for mercy arriving without permission or warning signs. By morning, the house returned to its rules. Rule 1. Maribel's legs were not to be touched. Rule 2. No prayers, no hymns, no talk of miracles. Everett had written them himself after too many well-meaning caregivers broke down crying in hallways. Hope, he learned, was messy. Nyla followed every rule in daylight. She moved slowly, asked permission before lifting a cup, before adjusting a blanket. She spoke to Maribel about ordinary things. Weather in Malibu, birds on the balcony, a cartoon humming softly on mute. Nothing that could be called treatment. Still, Everett watched. From his office, from his phone, from the screen beside his bed, he watched Nyla sit at eye level with his daughter, never above her, never behind her. The cameras showed patience he didn't recognize in himself. Maribel had been a storm before the accident. Skateboards, scraped knees, loud laughter. Now silence lived with them, heavy and expensive. Everett paid therapists to challenge it. Nyla simply respected it. When Everett passed them in the hallway, Nyla lowered her gaze. "Morning, sir," she said, gentle, steady. No guilt. No fear. That unsettled him more than defiance would have. Because Rule 3, unspoken but absolute, was this: no one was allowed to make Everett believe again. And somehow, without breaking a single written rule, Nyla Brooks already had. The cameras kept rolling, indifferent, as Everett tightened control elsewhere, signing contracts, issuing instructions, convincing himself vigilance was love, even as a quiet unease suggested the house was beginning to answer to something older than rules and his authority fading. And maybe that's why Everett couldn't shake the feeling settling in his chest. Because somewhere between rules and silence, between protection and fear, he began to wonder how many times he'd mistaken control for love, and how many of us do the same when we're scared of losing what matters most. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that you tried to protect them from pain by holding on too tightly, or if you've ever wondered whether hope can quietly return without asking permission, you're not alone, and maybe this story is for you. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever struggled to let go even when love asked you to trust instead? Everett had learned the sound of metal folding in on itself long before the doctor spoke. The Pacific Coast Highway shimmered that afternoon, the ocean bright and careless beside them. Maribel had been laughing in the back seat, her sneakers kicked off, music too loud. Everett remembered glancing in the mirror, smiling at her reflection, thinking, just for a second, that life felt simple again. Then the other car crossed the line. There were no flames. No dramatic explosion. Just impact, the sickening crunch, and Maribel's scream cutting off too fast. Everett remembered shouting her name while the world tilted. Remembered the way time stretched as if refusing to move forward. At the hospital in Santa Monica, machines replaced answers. Doctors spoke in careful sentences, practiced and distant. Spinal trauma. Incomplete injury. Uncertain outcomes. Words that hovered, never landing where Everett could grab them. Maribel didn't cry when they told her she couldn't feel her legs. She stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly, like someone listening to a story about another child. Everett became relentless after that. Rehab centers in Los Angeles. Private specialists flown in from the East Coast. Experimental therapies wrapped in optimism and disclaimers. He signed forms without reading them, wrote checks like prayers, convinced money could still negotiate with fate. At night, when the house finally slept, Everett replayed the accident in his head. If he'd left 5 minutes later. If he'd taken the inland route. If he'd been watching more closely. Control became survival. Cameras went up. Schedules tightened. Caregivers rotated out the moment their voices trembled. Nothing moved in Maribel's legs. Not once. So when Everett saw movement on that screen weeks later, his mind returned instantly to the highway. And for the first time since that day, fear wasn't the loudest thing in the room. Hope was. Nyla Brooks never hurried, and that was the first thing Everett noticed when he started watching her closely. In a house where staff moved quietly but quickly, Nyla moved like time had agreed to slow down for her. She didn't push Maribel's wheelchair unless asked. She didn't fill silences. She waited. That waiting unsettled Everett. Nyla spoke to Maribel as if her body hadn't changed, only her scenery. She described the jacaranda trees outside, the purple petals drifting onto the driveway. She talked about the smell of rain before it fell, about how mornings felt different near the ocean. Maribel listened. Her eyes followed Nyla's voice. Everett had paid professionals to stimulate response. Flashing lights, firm tones, constant encouragement. Nyla offered none of that. She treated Maribel like someone still deciding how to be in the world. One afternoon, Everett noticed something else on the feed. Nyla always positioned herself at Maribel's eye level. Never towering. Never kneeling unless invited by the moment. It felt intentional, respectful in a way Everett couldn't explain. There was no visible therapy. No stretching. No exercises. Just presence. Yet Maribel's hands began to move more. Fingers curling, relaxing. Small changes easy to dismiss. Easy, if Everett hadn't already seen the foot. By evening, as Nyla adjusted a blanket and stepped back, Maribel smiled. Not wide. Not dramatic. Just enough. Everett stared at the screen, uneasy. Because nothing about Nyla Brooks matched the systems he trusted. And somehow, without rushing, without permission, she was moving something he had buried under rules, contracts, and fear. Something fragile, dangerous, and alive. The cameras recorded everything except sound. That detail began to bother Everett more than it should have. Late that night, he watched Nyla sit beside Maribel's wheelchair, the room lit only by a lamp and the faint glow from the city beyond the glass. Nyla's mouth moved again, slowly, rhythmically. Everett leaned closer to the screen as if proximity might give him audio. He imagined words. Instructions. Promises he hadn't approved. But Nyla's face held no urgency, no expectation. Just a calm focus that reminded Everett of church mothers who prayed without spectacle, who believed God didn't need volume to listen. Then Nyla began to hum. Everett couldn't hear it, but he recognized the shape of it in her breath, the rise and fall of her shoulders. A melody that carried memory. His grandmother used to hum like that while braiding hair in Birmingham, trusting God with things she never named out loud. Maribel's eyes softened. Her shoulders dropped. Everett's chest tightened. He reminded himself this meant nothing. The brain responded to familiarity. Music soothed. Doctors had explained that years ago. Still, he watched Nyla press 2 fingers gently into Maribel's palm, then wait. Wait. Patience stretched the moment thin. Maribel's fingers closed, slow and deliberate, wrapping around Nyla's hand. Everett sucked in a breath. Not reflex. Response. He froze, afraid to blink, afraid to miss something else the cameras weren't built to explain. For the first time, Everett understood that surveillance gave him images, but not meaning. And whatever was happening between Nyla and his daughter lived somewhere deeper than lenses could reach. Everett told himself he wouldn't watch the next day. He failed. From his office, paperwork untouched, he pulled up the living room feed again. Nyla was there, sunlight cutting across the floor, Maribel angled toward the window. Everything looked ordinary. That steadiness almost disappointed him. Then Nyla placed her hand near Maribel's ankle. Not on it. Near it. Everett's jaw tightened. His finger hovered over the intercom button, ready to interrupt, to restore order. Instead he waited. Nyla whispered something Everett couldn't hear. She didn't look at the leg. She looked at Maribel's face. Take your time, Nyla seemed to say, though Everett could only guess. Maribel frowned, concentration knitting her brow. Her breathing changed, slower, deeper. Everett leaned forward. Nothing happened. Seconds passed. Everett exhaled, embarrassed by his own anticipation. Then Maribel's foot moved. Not a spasm. Not the jerking reflex Everett had memorized from medical videos. It slid forward, barely an inch, but deliberate. Intentional. Everett stood, knocking his chair back. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure the house could hear it. He watched the screen as Nyla didn't celebrate, didn't gasp. She simply nodded, like someone witnessing something sacred that didn't belong to her. Maribel looked stunned. Then she laughed, soft, surprised, almost afraid. Everett's vision blurred. He replayed the footage. Again. Slower. Frame by frame. The movement held. The impossible had weight now. Everett sank back into his chair, hands shaking, realization crashing over him. This wasn't an accident. This was something beginning. And he had no idea how to control it. Everett spent the next 2 days pretending the footage didn't exist. He buried himself in data instead. MRI scans. Progress charts. Clinical notes written in language that felt deliberately dull, as if emotion itself had been redacted. He called Maribel's neurologist in Santa Monica, then another specialist in Palo Alto, careful not to sound desperate. Spontaneous movement can happen, one of them said. It doesn't always mean recovery. Everett thanked him, hung up, and stared at the wall. He replayed the clip again that night, then pulled up older recordings for comparison. Weeks of stillness. Months of nothing. He slowed the footage, enlarged it, searched for explanations that fit inside medical certainty. Fatigue? No. Angle of the footrest? No. Muscle spasm? Too smooth. Data failed him. That failure unsettled Everett more than any bad prognosis ever had. He had built his life on systems that responded when pressure was applied. Markets. Algorithms. People. This didn't respond. At dinner, Maribel ate quietly, eyes brighter than usual. When Everett asked how her day was, she paused. "Good," she said, then added, "Nyla listens." The word lodged in his chest. Later, Everett sat alone in the study, the glow of the monitors painting his face pale. He realized something frightening. Every breakthrough in Maribel's care had come from force, pushing, testing, demanding more. Whatever Nyla was doing required none of that. And Everett didn't know how to invest in something he couldn't measure, bill, or command. Sleep wouldn't come. Everett drifted instead, caught between memory and screen glow. Sometime past midnight, he noticed Nyla in the living room again. No therapy. No movement exercises. Just her and Maribel, the lamp low, the world hushed. Nyla began to hum. This time, Everett didn't look away. Her shoulders rose and fell, steady, unhurried. The rhythm pulled something loose inside him, and before he could stop it, memory took over. His grandmother's house in Birmingham. Plastic-covered couches. Sunday afternoons heavy with heat and faith. She used to hum when money ran short, when bad news came in threes. "God hear you even when you tired," she'd say. Everett swallowed hard. On the screen, Nyla's lips formed words now, unmistakable even without sound. A hymn. Familiar. One his grandmother had sung while pressing oil into aching hands, believing healing wasn't always loud. Maribel closed her eyes. Everett felt his chest tighten, a pressure he hadn't known since childhood. He realized he hadn't prayed since the accident. Not really. He'd negotiated instead, offering money where surrender was required. Nyla finished the hymn and rested her hand on Maribel's arm. Nothing moved this time. Yet something shifted. Everett leaned back, shaken by the recognition that faith had entered his house quietly, without asking permission, wearing an apron instead of authority. And for the first time he wondered if the miracle wasn't movement at all, but memory returning where fear had ruled uninterrupted for too long. By the next morning, Everett stopped pretending curiosity was harmless. He asked his assistant to rerun Nyla Brooks' background check. Not the standard agency profile, the deeper one. Employment history. Certifications. Any records that might explain what his cameras could not. The results unsettled him. Nyla's file was thin where it shouldn't have been. No long-term domestic placements. No recent references beyond the church deacon who'd vouched for her last minute. But buried beneath the surface was something else. Something the agency hadn't highlighted because it didn't fit the role. A license. Expired but real. Physical therapy. State of California. Everett leaned back in his chair, pulse slowing as a new theory formed. This made sense. Training. Technique. Hidden exercises disguised as kindness. He almost felt relieved. Almost. But the dates didn't line up. Nyla had let her license lapse years ago. No disciplinary action. No malpractice. Just stopped. He scrolled further. A brief note from a hospital in Riverside. Volunteer status terminated at her own request. No explanation. Everett closed the file, unsettled again. That evening he watched Nyla help Maribel with dinner. No stretching. No covert therapy. Just conversation and patience. Nyla laughed when Maribel spilled water, then handed her a towel without correcting her grip. Everett realized something that bothered him deeply. If Nyla knew how to do more, she was choosing not to. And that restraint, deliberate, controlled, felt heavier than deception. For the first time since installing the cameras, Everett felt exposed. Because surveillance had given him information. But it hadn't given him truth. Everett found the rest by accident. Late one night, unable to sleep, he searched Nyla's name alongside the old hospital record. A local news article surfaced, years old, barely remembered. No photos. Just a short human interest piece buried beneath headlines. A hit and run. Riverside. A teenage boy crossing the street after church. Nyla Brooks' son. Everett read slowly, carefully. The article didn't dwell on grief. It mentioned spinal damage, permanent paralysis, a mother who quit her job to care for him full-time, insurance disputes, therapy cut short. At the bottom, one line stopped Everett cold. She says her faith didn't heal her son's body, but it kept his spirit alive. Everett closed the laptop, throat tight. The next day, he noticed something he'd missed before. Nyla spoke to Maribel differently when no one was watching, or when she thought no one was. Not softer, just braver. That afternoon, Maribel asked a question Everett hadn't heard her ask in months. "Does God hear me?" she said quietly. Nyla didn't answer right away. She sat down so their eyes met. "I believe he does," she said, "even when he answers slow." Maribel nodded, satisfied. Everett stood frozen in the hallway, unseen. That night, Nyla sat alone in the staff quarters, holding her phone, speaking softly into the dark. Everett caught only a glimpse on a hallway camera, her face lit gently, her voice tender. She wasn't praying. She was talking. And Everett understood then that Nyla Brooks wasn't practicing hope on his daughter. She was surviving it, every day, without expecting it to give her anything back. Everett chose the moment carefully. Mid-morning. Quiet house. Maribel resting after breakfast, eyes half closed, calm. Nyla was folding laundry in the sunroom when Everett stepped in, closing the door behind him with deliberate softness. "We need to talk," he said. Nyla looked up, unstartled. "Of course, sir." Everett gestured to the chair across from him. He didn't sit. Power felt easier standing. "I know about your license," he began. "The hospital. Your son." Nyla's hands stilled. Just for a second. "I didn't lie," she said evenly. "You didn't ask." "That's not the point," Everett snapped, then caught himself. He lowered his voice. "You're doing things with my daughter that weren't approved. Things I didn't consent to." Nyla met his eyes, steady. "I haven't done anything to her." Everett's jaw tightened. "I've seen the footage." Silence filled the room, thick and unyielding. Finally Nyla spoke. "Then you saw me wait." Everett faltered. "I saw movement. I saw you touch." "I saw you watch," Nyla interrupted gently. "Every day. Every night." The words landed harder than accusation. Everett felt heat rise in his chest. "Hope is dangerous," he said. "I won't let my daughter believe in something that can disappear." Nyla stood slowly. "Hope already disappeared," she said softly. "That's why she needs it handled with care." Everett opened his mouth, then stopped, because for the first time his authority felt thin. And Nyla Brooks wasn't afraid of it. Everett exhaled, the fight draining out of him all at once. "What exactly are you doing?" he asked. Not demanding now. Asking. Nyla didn't rush to answer. She folded the last towel, set it aside, then finally sat. "I listen," she said. "I wait. I pray when it feels right. And I don't push where fear already lives." "That's it?" Everett asked. "No techniques? No plan?" Nyla shook her head. "I learned a long time ago that bodies close up when they're commanded. Spirits too." Everett swallowed. "My daughter hasn't moved in 2 years." "I know," Nyla said. "My son hasn't moved in 7. The room stilled. "I tried everything," Nyla continued. "Exercises, schedules, specialists. When nothing worked, I thought God had failed me." She paused. "Turns out he was teaching me how to stop forcing what only love could invite." Everett felt something crack behind his ribs. "I don't heal nobody," Nyla said, voice quiet but firm. "I just make room. For trust. For peace." for God to show up however He chooses. From upstairs came a sound, light, sudden. A laugh. Everett's head snapped toward the ceiling. Nyla smiled, tears brightening her eyes. "That's new," she whispered. Everett stood there, unmoving as the sound echoed again, soft, real, unmistakable. For the first time since the accident, the house felt bigger than his fear, and smaller than the grace it was learning to hold. The laugh didn't fade the way Everett expected it to. It lingered in the house, light and uncertain, like something newly born that hadn't learned whether it was allowed to exist. Everett stood frozen beneath it, afraid that moving might scare it away. Upstairs, Maribel laughed again. Not loud, not effortless, but real. Everett climbed the stairs slowly, every step measured. When he reached Maribel's room, he stopped at the doorway. Nyla sat beside the bed, not touching, simply present. Maribel's eyes were bright, her face flushed with surprise, like she'd startled herself. "I felt funny," Maribel said, breathless. Like something woke up." Everett swallowed hard. He wanted to ask where. He didn't. Over the next days, changes came quietly. Maribel began responding before being spoken to. She rolled her shoulders when she laughed. Her hands moved more freely, reaching, pointing, resting on Nyla's arm without hesitation. Still, her legs remained still. Everett watched himself wrestle with disappointment and gratitude at once. The doctors would call this emotional progress, neurological engagement. Safe words that didn't promise too much. But Everett saw more. Maribel had begun to trust her body again, not as something broken but as something still worth listening to. One afternoon, Everett sat beside her wheelchair instead of across the room. "Does it hurt?" he asked. Maribel shook her head. "No. It just doesn't feel lonely anymore." The words struck deeper than any medical report. Everett glanced at Nyla, who gave no signal of victory, no knowing look. She simply nodded as if this had always been the work. That night, Everett turned off the camera in Maribel's room. Not because he stopped caring, but because he finally understood that some conversations didn't need witnesses. Turning off one camera should have felt reckless. Instead, Everett slept. The next morning he stood in the study, staring at the wall of screens. Every room, every angle. Proof that vigilance had replaced trust long before the accident. He reached out and shut off another feed. Then another. The house didn't fall apart. Nyla noticed immediately. "You okay?" she asked gently over breakfast. Everett nodded. "I think I am." He began spending time where the cameras used to speak for him. Sitting in the living room. Pushing Maribel's wheelchair onto the balcony himself. Listening instead of observing. Fear didn't vanish. It softened. One afternoon, Maribel asked him to wheel her closer to Nyla. "She helps me think," she said simply. Everett complied, something loosening in his chest. Later that night, Everett found himself alone in the study again. Only one monitor remained active, the exterior camera. The rest were dark. He realized something then. The cameras had never been about Maribel's safety. They had been about his helplessness. Everett powered down the last interior feed and leaned back in his chair, breathing slowly. For the first time, the house felt quiet without being watched. Upstairs, Maribel hummed softly. Not a hymn Everett recognized. But it didn't matter. The house was learning a new language, one without lenses, without fear, built slowly on presence. And Everett was finally listening. The setback came quietly, the way bad news often does. Maribel woke one morning heavy and withdrawn, her hands slow, her laughter gone. When Nyla spoke, Maribel answered with nods instead of words. By afternoon she asked to be alone. Everett felt panic rise, sharp and familiar. He called the neurologist before dinner, describing the changes too quickly, as if speed could force certainty. The doctor listened, then said what Everett feared and expected all at once. Progress isn't linear, he explained. Emotional engagement can fluctuate. This doesn't mean anything was lost. It means the brain is adjusting. After the call, Everett sat beside Maribel's bed, helplessness pressing in. He had let himself believe. He had turned off cameras. He had loosened control. And now this. That night, Everett found Nyla in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. "Did we push too far?" he asked. Nyla shook her head slowly. "We didn't push at all." "Then why does it feel like something slipped away?" Everett asked, voice tight. Nyla met his gaze. "Because hope makes you notice absence. Before you expected nothing. Now you're paying attention." The truth of it landed hard. "I'm afraid," Everett admitted, "of giving her something I can't protect." Nyla nodded. "That's every parent's fear. But hope isn't a promise. It's permission to stay present when things don't move." Upstairs, Maribel stirred. Everett stood, heart racing, and went to her room. She didn't smile when she saw him. She didn't laugh. But when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Everett sat with her until sleep came, learning that hope wasn't loud or constant. Sometimes it was simply staying. Later that night, Everett sat alone on the balcony. The ocean was dark, steady, indifferent to his wealth or worry. For years he had believed prayer was a transaction, words offered in exchange for outcomes. He had stopped when the outcomes didn't come. Now, with nothing to bargain, Everett bowed his head. He didn't ask for Maribel to walk. He didn't ask for certainty. "Teach me how to be here," he whispered. "However this goes." The words surprised him. They felt smaller than the prayers he used to make, and stronger. Inside, Nyla moved quietly through the house, humming as she cleaned, trusting the night to hold what the day could not. Everett realized he wasn't alone in believing something unseen was listening. The next morning, Maribel woke calmer. Not brighter. Not worse. Just present. "That's okay," Nyla said softly when Everett searched her face for meaning. "Stillness isn't failure." Everett nodded, understanding at last. For the first time, he accepted that faith wasn't about outcomes. It was about posture. And his had finally changed. The laugh came when no one was waiting for it. It was late afternoon, the kind that softened the edges of the house. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor as Everett adjusted Maribel's wheelchair near the balcony. Nyla stood nearby, folding a blanket, humming under her breath. Maribel had been quiet all day. Present but distant. Everett tried not to read into it. Then, without warning, Maribel laughed. It startled all three of them. The sound burst out of her, unguarded and bright, as if she'd surprised herself with it. Everett turned, heart stuttering. Nyla froze, the blanket slipping from her hands. "I don't know why," Maribel said between breaths. "I just feel light." Everett's throat tightened. He knelt beside her, not trusting himself to speak. The laugh came again, fuller this time, echoing off walls that had learned too much silence. Nyla wiped her eyes but didn't interrupt. She knew better. Everett felt something give way inside him, an old tension he hadn't realized he was still holding. This wasn't recovery. It wasn't proof. It was joy, brief and unprotected. And it changed the house. That evening, Everett ordered dinner in and ate with Maribel at the table instead of his study. They talked about nothing important. Nyla laughed with them, the sound natural now earned. As night settled, Everett realized something quietly monumental. For the first time in 2 years, the house didn't feel like a place where something had been lost. It felt like a place where something was growing. Weeks later, Everett removed the last cameras. Not in a rush. Not dramatically. One by one he disconnected them, stacking the screens in a closet he didn't plan to open again. The house felt warmer without their hum. Maribel didn't walk. Not yet. But she spoke more. She laughed often. Her hands moved freely now, expressive, confident. Some days her legs tingled. Some days they didn't. Everett learned to hold both without despair. On Nyla's last evening before a scheduled break, Everett found her in the living room, packing her bag. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. Nyla smiled gently. "You already did." "For what?" Everett asked. "For letting go," she said. "That's the hardest work." Upstairs, Maribel called out, "Daddy?" Everett went to her, instinctive now. She looked at him, eyes steady. "Even if I never walk," she said carefully, "I'm okay." Everett felt tears rise, not of grief but of release. He nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. Downstairs, Nyla stood quietly, a witness to something that didn't belong to her. Everett understood then what the cameras had never captured. They recorded movement, not meaning. Behavior, not belief. They watched fear, but missed love when it arrived softly, without proof. And as Everett closed the door behind Nyla that night, he knew the miracle had already happened. Not in Maribel's legs, but in the house that learned how to hope again. Stories like this remind us that some of the most powerful changes in life don't arrive loudly. They come quietly, through patience, faith, and the courage to hope again. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone you love, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find stories that heal. If you believe stories can soften hearts and restore faith in small human ways, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Thank you for listening.